Imagine that one day you wake up and realize something disconcerting. Much of what you feared in your life was never real. I'm not talking about a mind trick or empty optimistic phrases. I'm talking about a truth so powerful that when you understand it, it changes the way you see reality forever. How many times have you suffered in anticipation? Have you been distressed by things that never happened? Have you lost sleep over scenarios that, in the end, did not materialize? Perhaps you thought you would fail at something important, and when the time came, you discovered that you could do it. Or maybe you were terrified of public speaking, and then you noticed that no one was paying as much attention to you as you imagined. Fear, anxiety, anguish, they seem real, but they are often projections, images created by your mind. They govern us without us realizing it. They influence our decisions. They hold us back. They prevent us from acting. And the most shocking thing is that these thoughts do not come from the real world, but from our way of interpreting it. Our mind acts as if our worst nightmares were true, even though they only exist in the imagination. We get caught up in an incessant internal dialogue where we assume, judge, react, without really knowing what is happening outside. But what if suffering doesn't come from reality itself, but from how we interpret it? What if our fears are nothing more than automatic reactions, conditioned by experiences and beliefs, and not by concrete facts? Think about the anxiety you feel when you think someone is talking badly about you. You can spend hours trapped in thoughts, assumptions, memories, but often that person didn't even think about you. Your suffering was real, but its cause, non-existent. There is a way out of this cycle. There is a focus, a way of seeing the world that can free you from that kind of pain. It is not new. In fact, it is as old as it is powerful. It was formulated by a man who lost everything for daring to think differently. He was rejected, condemned, erased from his community. But in his isolation, he found clarity. His name was Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza was born in 1632 in Amsterdam, into a Sephardic Jewish community governed by strict rules. His parents, persecuted by the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal, had sought a place where they could live in peace. From a young age, Baruch showed remarkable intelligence. He questioned everything. While others accepted religious texts without question, he asked, "What is God really? Why do we suffer? What does it mean to be free?" But his community did not tolerate such concerns. To survive in a hostile Christian world, his people had learned not to draw attention to themselves, not to challenge the establishment. Spinoza broke those rules. He studied philosophy, science, logic, and he reached a bold conclusion. God is not an external being who rewards or punishes. God is the universe itself, the laws that govern it, nature in its totality. Everything happens out of necessity, not out of divine will. But to say that was unforgivable. At the age of 23, he was excommunicated. He was given the opportunity to recant, but he refused. The punishment was brutal. He was cursed, forbidden to speak to anyone, to help him, or even to mention his name. His family rejected him. His friends disappeared. For everyone, he ceased to exist. From then on, he lived as a social ghost, isolated from the world. But instead of sinking, Spinoza did something incredible. He transformed that rejection into freedom. He lived modestly, polishing glasses to survive. And in his spare time, he wrote. He thought. He formulated a philosophy that not only challenged his time, but also offers a way out for us today. Because Spinoza discovered that freedom does not consist in choosing between options, but in understanding reality as it is. While the world talked about free will, about good and evil, Spinoza talked about causes, about natural laws, about necessity. According to him, every emotion, every decision, every thought is determined by a chain of causes that are beyond our control. You don't choose what you feel. You don't choose what you desire. You don't choose your spontaneous reactions. Everything has a root, a history, a logic that can be understood. But far from making this a pessimistic view, Spinoza found in this truth a source of liberation. Because if you understand why you suffer, if you see clearly what conditions you can begin to free yourself. The key is not to force life to be as you want it to be, but to see clearly what it is like, and from there, to act wisely. That is what began to change his life. And it can change yours too. For centuries, humanity has strongly defended the idea of free will. We like to believe that we are the authors of our decisions, that we build our lives by freely choosing every step of the way. But Spinoza looked deeper and dared to say something disturbing, that freedom we revere so much is an illusion. According to him, everything we do, feel, and think is due to a chain of causes so extensive and complex that we are not even aware of it. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing escapes the order of nature. And that includes us. Think about it for a moment. Did you really choose your fears? Did you choose your tastes, your reactions, your way of being? Or were you shaped by your parents, your culture, your experiences, your traumas, your memories? From the moment we are born, we are immersed in an environment that shapes us without asking permission. You did not choose your childhood, nor the moments that most marked you. Even your deepest ideas are influenced by what you experienced. So where is this supposed freedom? Spinoza didn't say this to demoralize us, but to open our eyes. Because if everything has a cause, then so does suffering. And if we understand those causes, we can begin to transform our experience. Not from total control, but from understanding. The problem is that we live believing that we are to blame for feeling what we feel, that we should be fine, that we should react differently, that we should be stronger. But how can you be different if you never understood why you are the way you are? For Spinoza, true freedom does not consist of choosing between options without understanding where your desires come from. Freedom lies in understanding what moves you. When you see clearly what internal forces are dragging you along, you can begin to distance yourself. You can decide more consciously. Not because you become completely free, but because you stop living on automatic pilot. Imagine yourself in the middle of an emotional storm. You feel anger, fear, sadness. Before, you let yourself be carried away by that storm. Now, you can stop and observe. Where is this coming from? What triggers it? What story am I repeating in my mind? That pause is already an act of freedom. You're no longer just the effect. Now, you are also the observer. This also changes the way we see others. If everything we do is the result of a web of causes, then what others do, even when they hurt us, also comes from something that goes beyond them. This does not justify the harm, but it helps us to understand. And when we understand, it is easier to let go of resentment. It is easier to see with compassion. Think of someone who hurt you deeply. What motivated their action? Was it their fear, their insecurity, their unresolved pain? Often, what we call evil is nothing more than ignorance and accumulated suffering. And when you see that, your relationship with the world changes. You're no longer surrounded by enemies, but by human beings who, like you, are reacting to what they experienced. Spinoza believed that when we understand this natural order of things, we stop resisting the inevitable. And with that, much of the suffering dissolves. Because pain arises when something does not fit with what we expected. We believe that the world should be fair, that people should behave as we wish, that life should meet our expectations. But the universe does not respond to our desires. It responds to its own laws. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have dreams or take action. On the contrary, it means you can do so without anguish, without attachment, without depending on the result to be at peace. You can act because you understand, not because you are desperate to change something external. And that changes the whole experience. Effort ceases to be a burden. It becomes an expression of clarity. Sometimes, we live as if everything happened to us, as if the universe had something against us. But Spinoza invites you to pause and see with different eyes. You are not the center of a drama. You are part of an order. And when you understand that, you start to breathe differently. Fear, guilt, and stress begin to lose their power. Because if everything you feel has a cause, then it also has a solution, understanding. And at that moment, what seemed like a prison becomes a possibility. You no longer fight against what you feel, nor do you blame yourself for what you cannot control. Now you begin to observe, to accept, and to act from a different place. And there, without you realizing it, a new form of freedom is born. When you begin to understand that your emotions are not voluntary decisions, but reactions conditioned by your history, something changes. Suffering is no longer felt as a punishment or as a sign of weakness. It becomes a signal, a clue, a message that you can read to discover more about yourself. And instead of resisting or repressing it, you can begin to listen to it with a different attitude. Spinoza said that if you understand the cause of your fear, that fear ceases to dominate you. Not because it magically disappears, but because you no longer see it as an internal threat, but as a logical response to something you experienced. At that moment, you stop fighting with yourself. You stop punishing yourself for feeling what you feel. And that, in itself, is already a form of relief. Imagine that someone ignores you in a conversation. Your mind starts racing. I'm sure they don't like me. It always happens to me. I'm not important. But if you stop, you can ask yourself a question. Is this an automatic reaction, or is there really something serious here? Maybe that person is just distracted. Maybe it has nothing to do with you. Emotion is activated, yes, but you can observe it without making it true. Spinoza proposed precisely that, to observe our emotions with clarity, not to deny them, but to understand them, not to run away from them, but to see them as they are. Because in that observation, freedom is born. The freedom not to act from impulsivity, the freedom not to repeat patterns, the freedom to choose how to respond. And this is where the power of reason comes in, not as something cold or distant, but as a tool that allows us to see beyond the mental noise. When you use reason, you can ask yourself questions that open up space. Does this emotion reflect reality, or is it just an interpretation? What is this trying to show me? Is it worth getting upset about this now? Over time, that kind of reflection transforms your daily experience. Much of human suffering stems from the difference between our expectations and reality. We expect recognition, love, justice. And when they don't come, we get frustrated. But if we understand that the universe is not here to fulfill our desires, but rather follows its own course, we can change the way we react to what happens. This does not mean that we should be indifferent. It means that we can act without depending on the outcome. You can give your best without getting caught up in the need for everything to be perfect. You can accept a loss without that loss destroying your identity. You can go through a difficulty without it taking away your peace. Spinoza reminds us that we do not control the flow of life, but we can work with it. It's like rowing on a river. You don't decide the direction of the water, but you do decide how to adjust your movement. And the more you understand how that river works, the less you resist, the less you suffer, the more peace you experience. Accepting is not giving up. It is stopping fighting against what cannot be changed. It is recognizing that pain is sometimes part of the journey, but that it does not need to drag you down if you know how to hold on inside. It is letting go of the need for everything to fit in with your idea of how it should be, and opening up to what is. And that can be trained. It can be cultivated. Every time you observe an emotion without judging it, you are building up that inner strength. Every time you choose understanding over judgment, you are taking a step towards that freedom that does not depend on the world, but on your clarity. Spinoza lived without seeking recognition. He died without fame, without wealth, without a large following. But he left a legacy that still resonates today because it touches on something essential: the human longing to live in peace, to understand, to stop suffering for what we cannot control. His message was not to shout at the world, but to whisper to the souls of those willing to listen. And if you have come this far, you are probably starting to listen too. When you start to apply these ideas in your day-to-day life, you notice something very specific. It's not that the world changes, it's that the way you are in the world changes. You no longer react with such intensity to every obstacle. You no longer take everything personally. And little by little, you regain a peace of mind that you didn't know was possible, because you are not fighting against what you feel. You are understanding why you feel it. And that, although it may seem like a small change, transforms everything. Spinoza was not talking about escaping pain. He knew that life has difficult moments. But what he proposed was a different relationship with that pain. Instead of resisting it, understanding it. Instead of fearing it, observing it. Emotional suffering, he said, arises when we want reality to be different from how it is. We want to be loved as we imagine, for plans to work out as we dream, for the world to act as we expect. But life does not respond to our ideas. It responds to its own logic. And when that does not fit with our expectations, we suffer. That's why a large part of the job is to let go of that constant struggle, to stop demanding that the universe accommodate our desires, and to start accepting that some things are just the way they are. That doesn't mean resigning ourselves. It means acting from a place of clarity, not frustration. It means that you can continue to desire things, but without clinging to them as if they were the only possible source of your well-being. Imagine you plan a trip for months, and the day before, your flight is canceled. You can spend hours cursing your luck, complaining, frustrated. Or you can accept what happened, look for alternatives, and adapt. The fact does not change, but your experience does. And that is what Spinoza wanted to show us, that the key lies in how we interpret what happens to us. Not because what happens is unimportant, but because you have power over how you experience it. That is a different kind of freedom from the one we usually imagine. It is not the freedom to do what you want, when you want. It is a quieter, deeper freedom. The freedom to choose your response. The freedom not to be a slave to your emotions. The freedom to act with conscience, even in the midst of chaos. And that also changes how you see others. When you understand that each person acts according to their own causes, their wounds, their conditioning, it becomes easier for you to stop judging. It doesn't mean justifying everything, but it does mean seeing with more understanding, seeing with more humanity, because we are all in the same boat, trying to live, to understand, to feel good in a world that we often don't fully understand. Spinoza's proposal, then, is not a distant theory. It is a daily practice. Observe without judging. Think before reacting. Accept what you cannot change. And act with more lucidity. Little by little, this approach transforms your way of life. You don't need to change country or job or have a perfect life. You need to look with different eyes. And that, even if it doesn't seem like it, changes everything. Spinoza did not seek fame or followers. He lived with just enough, apart, in silence. But from that stillness, he formulated a philosophy that transcends time, because he talks about the most human things: fear, pain, hope, the search for peace. And he did so without dogmas, without imposing answers, only inviting us to look more clearly, to understand, to free yourself. You no longer need to fight so hard. You're no longer trapped in the illusion that everything must be perfect in order to feel good. You discover that although you cannot control what happens, you can understand it. And in that understanding, there appears a form of peace that does not depend on anything external. A peace that is not euphoria, nor is it empty of emotions, but rather it is made of clarity. Spinoza understood this before many others, and that is why his philosophy was not an invitation to resign oneself, but a proposal for inner freedom. He chose to live simply, far from power and recognition. And in that choice, he found something that many seek all their lives and never attain: coherence, serenity, meaning. His life was proof that you don't need fame to transform the world. It is enough to see clearly and share that vision. And you now also have that possibility. Not to change everything all at once, but to start looking at things in a different way. To ask yourself, every time something hurts, am I suffering because of what happened or because of how I interpret it? To ask yourself, every time you get angry, where does this reaction come from? What story am I responding to? And to remember, in moments of doubt, that you can act from understanding rather than impulse. It is not an easy path. It requires attention, honesty, patience, but it is a real path. And unlike the empty promises we so often hear, this is a proposal that does not depend on chance or luck. It depends on your willingness to look inward, on your decision to live with more awareness. The big question that remains is this: will you continue trapped in the same interpretations that make you suffer, or will you dare to see with different eyes? Because we can't change everything we experience, but we can change how we experience it, and therein lies our strength. So now I want to ask you, what is the fear that you find most difficult to let go of? Or what is the emotion that you would most like to understand better? Write it down below in the comments. I want to read you. Because sometimes putting it into words is the first step to letting it go. And if this content made you think, if it helped you see life more clearly, subscribe to the channel. Here we continue to explore together what philosophy, psychology, and deep thought can offer us to live with more peace, more truth, and more freedom. See you in the next video. And remember, suffering doesn't come from reality. It comes from how you interpret it, and the interpretation can be changed.